Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Age of AI, our series covering the rapid evolution of the AI landscape and exploring what's now, what's next, and how that impacts the world of business, the workplace, individuals, and really the world. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, principal analyst here at Kramer&Co. And our conversation today will focus on the role trust scores and blockchain play in the golden age of AI that we are experiencing at this moment in time. My guest today is Dr. Scott Zoldi, who's the Chief Analytics Officer at FICO. Welcome, Scott. I'm so glad to have you.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Shelly. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. From one data nerd to another, these are always my favorite conversations. So, to set the stage a little bit, it's a given that every company today is considering how to implement AI, whether it's for customer services, financial services, or a myriad of other use cases and solutions. And in that race to innovation, it's not enough to simply be fast on the AI front, although that's really the tactic that many are using. Businesses, though, they need to make sure that AI is being used responsibly and ethically. And Scott, I know that's something that you are passionate about. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation and talking about the role that AI trust scores and blockchain practices play when it comes to enabling that responsible AI practice. Are you ready to dive in?
I am.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, just to kind of start out, will you share a little bit with us about kind of your career journey and what that's been like?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a PhD physicist. I studied theoretical physics. I also high performance computer scientist. I spent some time after my PhD at Los Alamos thinking about very theoretical questions about computing. But about 25 years ago, I joined a company called H&C Software, one of the pioneers of machine learning back in the late 90s. And continue my career. And now I serve, after about 25 years, the last 10 years, I've served as FICO's Chief Analytics Officer. And throughout that time, I've constantly interested in how the field of AI has been evolving, how we should contribute and define AI for financial services and other regulated environments. And as part of that, I'm a big eventer. And so one of the things that I like to do is really always challenge the norm and think about where things are headed. And so from that perspective, as part of my career at FICO, I've also written about 143 patents with 101 granted, and they're all focused on how to apply AI in safe and responsible ways for our customers' businesses.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you. So, in this age of AI, the topic of responsible AI is such an important one. And I know that there's a standard framework that companies should consider following on that front. Would you share with us a little bit about how you think about that, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, AI is a huge field and one that it's developing so rapidly, right? It's almost mind blowing just how many things occur even within a week and how much things change. And one of the challenges is that the complexity of how you use AI, how you build with AI, how you monitor AI is just overwhelming for any one data scientist and for any one organization. And so organizations have had to face the fact that if they want to consistently develop AI that's responsible, that's safe, and that is productive, meaning that they meet the business sort of objectives that they would want from those AI solutions, they need to look to standardizing, right? In the same way that we have standards for software engineering and how code gets developed, tested, persisted, and released, that same sort of frameworks are required for AI. Now, unfortunately, there's not one AI framework out there. There are standards that have been published and advices. But what we kind of advocate for is that every organization needs to come up with its own AI standard, which would basically say, given the complexity of this technology, all data scientists have to follow, these sort of procedures and use these sort of algorithms, and so that we can have consistency and reproducibility in how these AI solutions get developed. And on top of that, where there are regulatory requirements or safety requirements or governance requirements, that those are also met. Without that, every single data scientist would build it differently. Every single data science project would be a archaeological mission to understand what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And really this is such a fundamental and foundational thing, right? This is like building a house. You, generally speaking, of course, depending on what area of the country you live in first, but you want to build a foundation for that house, whether it's, sitting on top of a basement or a concrete foundation or something like that. I mean, you have to have that foundation before you really start building. And I think that's really a key part of this whole equation.
Yeah, and it doesn't always happen, right? And
Yeah,
you'd be amazed. In fact, I'm amazed. We still have these sort of challenges in the industry with operationalization of AI, and
right.
a lot of folks just jump in with AI and then they scratch their heads and say, how do you operationalize it? How do we actually use it? And the statistics have gotten a little bit better, but it used to be 95% of all AI projects get thrown in the trash can because no one's ever started with a good foundation, let alone understanding how it gets deployed. And so
Yeah,
yeah, a little bit of thought up front, a little bit of precision and pragmatism there goes a long way to
yeah.
actually going from a science project to something that provides that business value.
Yeah. And I think, you made the comment that I would be surprised. I can promise you I won't be surprised because I see this on a regular basis as an analyst. And this is not the space to move fast and break things, to have that be your strategy. And this is something that comes with great risk. You have to have a well thought out strategy and execution plan, and there's a lot at stake here. And I think one of the key things, part of our conversation is going to hinge on trust, but being able to trust in AI, whether it is, internally, your employees using it, the results that are produced, all of that sort of thing, this is critically important. And it, you can't just throw things against the wall and hope that it works. Well, you can, but that's not very smart.
It's not right, and it's a natural sort of friction, right? This sort of notion to be excited about AI and want to grab a hold of that golden age, and I think it's very alluring, right? But on
Yeah,
top of that is it's really difficult, and I think I even notice in many parts of our customers' businesses there's that natural push and pull, right? Push to achieve those results and to leverage AI. But slowing down and figuring out how we do it is a big part of being able to meet that sort of objective with
yeah.
that value.
Yeah, I agree. So I know that we've talked just a little bit about this, but if you had to, if I put you on the spot and asked, what are the 3 or 4 things that companies really need to think about and ask themselves before implementing an AI solution, what would they be?
So the first one may be a little controversial, like why do we need AI? Right.
Yeah,
I think that's one of probably the most fundamental sort of questions is, is this problem that I'm trying to solve, does it require AI or not? Do I have an acceptable solution with traditional technologies? So, I think the first thing is to really make sure that AI is required, right? AI doesn't necessarily make every problem better. And you may be distracting yourself from the areas that you really need AI as part of your business. So one needs to basically look at it as AI, not as the hammer to find every nail, right? It's more to say, is this really an AI use case? Now, once you reach that and say, yes, it is an AI use case, then I think there's this hard sort of look at whether you're prepared to leverage that AI. Do you have the expertise? And this goes back to my earlier comment, like it is mind-boggling the amount of complexity in the AI space today. It's hard to have
yeah,
any one person that's going to expert in all technology. And so firms and companies tend to have expertise in pockets. And so the question is, what are those pockets? Where are our strengths? And do we leverage those strengths and we're well aligned, or do we have to get additional expertise or help on
right,
it?
right.
Um, the third piece of this would be around, then going and asking, how do we operationalize this, right? And this is the question that we just mentioned. Like, if you don't know how you're going to operationalize it, if you don't know what your latencies are, your throughputs, you don't know what your computational budget is, you don't know how you're going to inference this, right? And you may or may not have the right computing environments, right? All that needs to be understood because
Right.
operationalization, the key is to know that so that you can constrain your AI to fit within these sort of operational constraints. And
Yeah.
too often that's not asked. And then final fourth one out of 3 out of 4 would be to go to that AI standard, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if this is going to provide value, people need to be able to monitor it. They need to have confidence and trust in it. And part of that is to follow a standard and record what you're doing so that it can pass model governance, it can pass regulatory sort of scrutiny.
Yeah.
And once it's deployed, when you need to give it some care and feeding along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would add here that I think is um, also foundationally important is I think you need to ask yourself, what is the state of our data? What is our data management practices? How are we able to access and use our data? And you can't have successful AI initiatives without really having your arms around data and data management and that sort of thing within organizations. And
I agree
yeah,
completely. Yeah,
and people
absolutely.
forget that, you know what I'm saying? I mean, data feeds these monsters, right? So
Yep.
you've got to, and that's really the biggest challenge. I've done research with a number of clients on this front, and that's one of the biggest challenges. It's not a lack of desire to dive into AI initiatives. It's not a lack of capabilities or anything else. A lot of times it's really that first step of getting arms around data, and that gets in people's way a lot, but it's super
No,
important.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, and AI is just a representation of data at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So yeah, if you don't
Yep.
have the right data, then you're not going to have much of a representation for your
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scott, we've touched on this before. The whole focus of this episode is about trust and AI. So talk with me a little bit, if you would, about how companies rather build trust in AI.
Yeah, so the companies build trust in AI through the ability to demonstrate that they have developed AI in an accountable fashion. They're accountable for the actions that they're taking, and they're following an AI development standard. And that standard would include things such as robust AI, which is focused on things like making sure the data is representative and is been reviewed for bias. It focuses on building models robustly and in a stable fashion, and doing all the sort of traditional human-in-the-loop processes around developing these models. It also includes things like choosing the right types of machine learning or AI that's interpretable for areas where we have regulatory sort of scrutiny or governance, where we need to know what that AI has learned in terms of the relationships between these inputs of data that we provide to it. Third would be around ethical AI, testing each of those learned relationships for proxies of bias to ensure that when we build these models, that we're not propagating bias that might be an artifact of the environment we live in, right, or the
Right.
data that we curtailed. And finally, just having the ability to audit. And so ensuring that requirements are set, success criteria are up front, and they're not changed through the project when we don't meet them. They're established, they're immutable, and there's a record of whether they are met or not. And that really establishes a huge amount of trust. And if that's all done, Shelly, then trust continues to be garnered over time, because those models will perform well,
Yeah.
and customers will get the outcome that they would expect from them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I had such an interesting observation at an industry event that I attended. Oh gosh, it's probably been about a month ago, and what this particular company did is gather together CFOs or people in similar roles to a CFO of some very large companies. And one of the things that they were talking, one of the comments that one of these CFOs said was that, and this is a CFO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And he said that, in his opinion, it was impossible to measure the results, the efficacy of AI initiatives. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, one, that's incorrect, because I know people who are doing that, right? And one of the things that you mentioned in the early part of your last answer was, having success sort of metrics in mind or benchmarks in mind. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure that? And I just thought it was so interesting, because I cannot imagine, Scott, going to my board, asking for budget to do something or something like that, and saying, I can't really measure this, so just trust me, it's going to deliver for us. And I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? And for a company like FICO, like we've been developing AI and machine learning for 3 decades. We have to demonstrate the value, because our customers leverage this. And I think it's back to that foundation question, like where do we want to apply AI, and what's the business problem we have to solve, and how are we going to measure it? And you're absolutely correct. If we're just going to go play with AI. Okay, sure, we may not be putting the right sort of measurements in place to ensure that we measure business value, but fortunately, the business that we're in at FICO, it's around solving problems. So the problem is well known, right? And so, how much we improve detection or how much we improve a customer interaction can be measured. And I think people minimize that. It's tremendously important. And that's the only way to show that value when you go speak to the board. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, it would just kind of gobsmacked me that somebody at a company of this size in a role of a CEO would really lean into at this point, it's just not possible to measure this. And, anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that.
Yeah.
So, so let's talk about AI trust scores. What is an AI trust score and how are these designed to help businesses make better decisions around AI, Scott?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting area for me and one that I'm really passionate about. So I've been in the area of responsible AI for, I don't know, 9 years now, and lots and lots of patents and ideas around how we drive responsible AI practices in traditional AI. So traditional AI is these deep networks and neural networks, interpretable neural networks, and other technologies. Trust scores are really around how do we make that journey of having responsible AI methods and concepts applied to generative AI. And so generative AI is a big part of this golden age of AI that we all talk about, which still is, the lion's share is still traditional AI methods, but many, many people want to leverage generative AI in safe and responsible ways. And so what those trust scores are essentially, an inspection of what is the purpose of this generative AI model that we've developed. What are what we call knowledge anchors, right? The answers and the questions that we expect it to be able to answer as a qualified, truthful, well-built sort of a focused language model, let's say. And then the trust score basically measures, like when a question gets asked and one of these language models produces an answer, one of these generative AI models produces an answer, how well aligned is that? The question and the answer and the vocabulary that's used, is it aligned with these knowledge anchors? And moreover, in the training data, how much evidence do we have that the relationships are valid, right? When it generates an answer. And that's really important because you can imagine that, and we've seen, right, these technologies can hallucinate quite often. And this is one of the barriers to adoption of these generative AI technologies. So by having an independent trust score that's measured against these knowledge anchors and details of how that model was trained, we can produce a second score. And that second score is a trust score. And it would go from one where you have no trust whatsoever to like a very high score where you have trust. And you could go use it. Because the problem is with these sort of technologies, if you don't know the answer, the correct answer, then you may not have confidence in using the answer that comes out of one of these generative AI systems. So trust scores help with that. And for an organization, enterprise like our customers, right, they dial up or dial down the trust scores based on the type of decisions or types of outcomes that would come out of these generative AI models. So it's really on a risk-based operationalization of these technologies to limit hallucination and other things that could come out of the uses of these technologies.
Yeah, I love it. Trust scores. I think that's really important and is going to continue to be more important. So very cool. Very cool that you're doing that. So I want to dive a little bit more, Scott, into what the team at FICO is doing. I know many of your customers are in highly regulated industries, banking, financial institutions, etc. Can you talk a little bit about how FICO is helping those customers operationalize and use AI, and maybe share with us some examples of companies using AI effectively? And not to put you on the spot, but if you have any results that you might be willing to share that they're seeing, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. So from a FICO perspective on operationalization of AI, this is one of our key strengths, right? And it really comes down to that the focus on nothing is done at FICO without a view to how we operationalize. And part of that is, when we want to solve a business problem, whether it be, protecting someone from being financially scammed and losing their life savings, to making a better decision about how to incorporate additional transaction data to make a better, customer risk decision. We have to focus on how it gets deployed. And so a big part of that operationalization for our clients is to have the right types of technologies such as these interpretal neural networks or transaction analytics, which are these behavioral profiles that provide that hyper personalization insight. And how do you operationalize that at the scale of business? So, maybe that's you have to process 1,000 transactions, within a second. Maybe it's 10,000 transactions in a second, and it all has to occur within 10 milliseconds. And this is a big part of how we do this is through what we call our FICO platform. So it's essentially the software frameworks that are custom built for incorporation of these models, ingestion of the data, the pre-processing, execution of the model, and then ultimately making decisions through strategies and then looking at that from a simulation perspective. So a big part of what we do is to take what we've done throughout these years and now make it sort of accessible to our clients so we can build new types of models, or they can bring models and build them there. The other major component around operationalization is not just getting the software to work, right, and meet those sort of SLAs around how these scores have been developed. It's around the responsible AI frameworks, right? It's around these AI development standards. And so, many of our clients leverage technology such as interpretal neural networks or some of these monitoring tools around whether or not the outcomes are ethical or not as part of that operationalization standard, so they can understand whether anything's changing, in the environment that would cause the model to be potentially less trustworthy and something they'd want to take advantage of, to go look at. And redo. And then finally, use cases, they're all over the place, and it's great. I mean, that's why there's this golden age of AI, and it's great for me and my team because we get to work on so many different types of problems. But today, things like financial scams is a humongous problem, where people are being tricked into divulging payment details and bank account information, and they lose life savings. And so it's very, that's an area that we've seen 30-40% improvements over what's traditionally been done using traditional fraud scores or strategies to protect people's outcomes, and in fact even predict who might be vulnerable in the future, so we can reach out to them and educate. There's many other use cases, such as applying generative AI to help with whether or not an entire customer service organization is in compliance with policies or regulations and how they interact with customers, and if not, how do they remediate that? And using generative AI to look at every single conversation and providing that feedback so entire organizations can be made more compliant. And then finally, probably just back to the credit risk, the things like transaction data and transaction analytics are really, really hot right now, and customers want to leverage every piece of information they have from consumers, including getting that consumer consent so that better decisions get made. Because frankly, right, the consumers are getting more and more, aware of the power of AI themselves, and so they understand the value of their data. And many of them are asking for us to consume more of their transactions and more of their data if it can improve an outcome and their journey with, let's say, a financial institution, a telco, or an insurer. And so all of those are use cases that we are looking at.
What I like about this, Scott, is that people generally know what FICO is, and they think they know what FICO does. But one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation is that what you do from a services standpoint and a solution standpoint, and how you're serving customers, especially as it relates to their AI initiatives, I think is really much broader than most people realize.
It is, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're the analytics software company, right? And we're well known for our credit score, but the amount of sort of research we do in AI and machine learning, and the amount of sort of focus we have on operationalizing is a very different FICO than many people would think of us. So yeah, I'm glad we're having the conversation about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's switch gears and talk about something else that I don't think people will think about as they think about FICO as a brand. Let's talk about blockchain. So I know that blockchain is so often tied to things like cryptocurrency and that sort of thing, but I know that you think that blockchain has a place in building trust in AI, in and around AI systems. So share with us a little bit, if you would, about your thoughts on the role you see blockchain playing in the future of AI, and why this is something that the C-suite really needs to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I'm very, very bullish on AI and blockchain combined together. And so I actually view that these two will become very, very close mates in terms of how both technologies get used. For us at FICO today, right, we have an AI development standard and a deployment standard. And as we follow those standards, we use blockchain to record every piece of information about how we develop models. And those include like the requirements and success criterias. It includes major sort of steps in the AI development process and assets we'll need for governance and regulation down the road, and also how to monitor. What's important about blockchain is that what we record there is an immutable record of the truth. And truth is a little bit hard to come by, right, when we look at data. And so that blockchain is basically emphasizes how did the AI get developed? And was it compliant with the AI standard that everyone's supposed to follow? And in fact, the way we use AI, blockchain with our AI is to enforce this AI standard. So it's not just good enough to have a standard that you put on your desk and you read once and then you don't look at it again.
Right.
We use it to basically enforce it on blockchain, meaning that all those steps in that standard need to be recorded as requirements with specific testing and success criteria. They are going to be either met or not met. And if they're not met, all of those requirements and all those success criteria, the model does not get released. And that is how we actually enforce across hundreds of data scientists at FICO that we're developing to that standard. Now, that allows us to develop AI that's responsible and safe and ethical. And we have the assets to make sure that people know how to run that in production and all those things that are very important. But the thing that gets lost also that the C-suite has to understand is it's not just about being responsible. It's also around meeting our goals from a productivity perspective. Software and AI gets built at a much, much higher quality. There's less confusion around how to defend these models, right? And everything gets faster. So when we talked earlier about, time to market, right? The blockchain is a tremendous tool for time to market because there's not time thinking about which algorithms we use. We prescribe the algorithms, right? We prescribe success criteria. We're not going to waste time when we're at a dead end, and we're not going to be able to release a model to that standard. But when we are able to, we're able to march through that in an efficient, fast way, and with code and methods that have been shown to work. And that's where it's really powerful because you can generate hundreds and hundreds of models on a single standard. And the only thing that you need to debate from time to time is the quality of that AI standard, and that makes organizations phenomenally efficient with its development of AI at high quality, high trust, and then high productivity, which we generally don't talk about, but certainly important to the C-suite.
Yeah, absolutely. All of this plays an important role, I think, in success, right?
Yes.
So, Scott, as we wrap the episode, I read your 2025 predictions for AI and Gen AI published earlier this year. And as I mentioned earlier in this episode, you've spoken of this as the golden age of AI. What do you think that means for the financial services industry specifically? And what advice do you have for our listeners as they navigate their own enterprise AI journeys?
Yeah, so AI's been around for a huge amount of years, right? But what's changed now, what really has made this the golden age of AI, is that tremendously powerful AI technology, compute, and data resources are now available to financial services as they never were before. And on top of that, organizations like FICO and others have focused on kind of responsible frameworks, whether it be a responsible AI framework around robust, interpretable, ethical, auditable AI, or whether it be things like trust scores, where you can actually, demonstrate that you're putting the risk controls around the use of these technologies, means that organizations can look at their business in fundamentally different ways. They can consume data, ask questions, and then operationalize like they've never done before. And then on top of it, we have the AI platforms and decisioning platforms that natively bring these AI models and into the fray. They access things like our immutable blockchains that contain information around how to monitor. And it goes from science fiction and excitement and to basically an operationalized way of bringing all that technology together. And I think for many of our clients and our customers, they look at this and, it's like a kid in a candy store. Like, what do I want to grab first in terms of my use cases? And I think, a lot of that is at their fingertips. In a way it's never been before, and I think it's going to just continue to improve. If we look at things like generative AI, we're going to models that are much more focused on the data that you need to build for your specific use case. And there's concepts of responsible AI and new frameworks. And I think all this is just really powerful because some of the things that would cause some of the financial services organizations to take a pause because they're uncomfortable with, right, are getting very rapidly scaffolded so that people can start to take more aggressive use of AI in their businesses and meet all that sort of advantages, and promise of that golden age, but in a responsible, safe way that they can be, comfortable using.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's great advice. I would expect nothing less. And, really to recap, the importance of trust scores and exploring how blockchain can play a key role here, all of those things. And of course, getting your data right to begin with. Always all important parts of this equation. And Dr. Scott Zoldi, Chief Analytics Officer at FICO, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of The Age of AI. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, and you did not disappoint.
Thank you, Shelly. It was great. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Great.
All right. Thanks to our audience for listening and viewing. If you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, now is a great time to do it. And we'll see you here on The Age of AI next time. Thanks again, Dr. Zoldi, for joining us.